stars stretched endlessly above Earth's orbit, sparkling like tiny diamonds on black velvet. But in the heart of the United Nations Galactic Council, the humans felt anything but infinite. They were cornered. Their fleets were scattered, their colonies threatened, and across the galaxy, whispers spoke of a single unstoppable force, the Virelian Empire. For centuries, humans had looked to the stars with hope. Now that hope was thin, fragile. And yet, one man stood at the edge of history, ready to carry it into alien hands. Commander Elias Hart had never imagined himself in such a role. A former military officer turned diplomat, Elias was chosen not for nobility, not for wealth, but because he had survived situations where most humans would break. Calm, intelligent, and unafraid, he was humanity's last chance to stop a war that could end civilization. The day began quietly. Earth's diplomatic shuttle glided past the massive gates of the Virelian capital, its hull reflecting the pale blue of nearby stars. The city below sprawled like a living organism, towers of silver, bridges of glowing crystal, and streets that shimmered with energy. At the top of the tallest tower stood the Royal Council Hall, a place where humans had never been allowed, except as prisoners or beggars. Elia's shuttle landed and the doors hissed open. The air smelled different here, sharp and metallic, yet strangely clean. He stepped onto the platform and straightened his posture. Around him, Virelian guards, towering and armored, eyed him with suspicion. Their skin was pale green, scaled, and almost reflective. Their eyes were golden, unblinking. Every movement was precise, controlled, like a predator calculating its prey. "Stay calm," Elias whispered to himself, though his heart beat faster than he wanted to admit. The council hall was enormous, with ceilings that arched like the ribs of some gigantic creature. Light flowed from crystal chandeliers, refracted into colors that humans could barely name. In the center of the hall sat the Virelian royal court, the emperor, a figure as imposing as a mountain, and beside him, his daughter, Princess Celara. She was younger than Elias expected, but her presence was undeniable. Sharp eyes, tall and proud, every movement deliberate. She was both beautiful and dangerous, the living embodiment of her empire. The emperor's voice echoed through the hall. "Human, you are Elias Hart." "Yes, your majesty," Elias said, bowing slightly though carefully. He refused the full, traditional Virelian bow that would put him on the floor. It was dangerous. In their culture, such a refusal could be seen as disrespect, even a challenge. The emperor studied him, expression unreadable. "You come to negotiate peace. Yet your species has resisted all reason, all tradition, all law. Why should we listen to you?" Elias inhaled slowly, measuring his words. "Because war would destroy more than just our worlds. Because my people, though flawed, are willing to learn and adapt. And because peace, when given a chance, can be stronger than fear." A murmur ran through the hall. The Virelians were not used to hearing humans speak with such confidence, without pleading, without arrogance, just honesty. The emperor's golden eyes narrowed. "Humans are weak. Short-lived, emotional. You are lucky the council even allows your presence here." Elias stepped forward. "Weak, perhaps, but weakness does not define survival. Humanity has endured plagues, wars, and the collapse of civilizations. We are emotional, yes, but our choices, even flawed, carry courage. And that courage has kept us alive in the darkest hours." The hall was silent. The guards shifted, the courtiers stared. No human had ever dared speak like this. Elias could feel the weight of history pressing down, but he refused to flinch. Princess Celara leaned slightly forward. Her voice, calm and melodic, cut through the tension. "You speak boldly, human. Do you understand the cost of such boldness? In Virelian law, courage must be proven or it becomes foolishness. You stand in the shadow of your own death." Elias met her gaze without fear. "I understand, but if survival requires more than fear, then I choose courage." The emperor's clawed hand tapped the council table. "You amuse me. Perhaps too much. He paused, then nodded slowly. There is an ancient law among us. It states that any outsider who earns the respect of the royal court may be considered for a bond of trust, loyalty, and, if necessary, marriage. Elias froze for a heartbeat. He had come to negotiate peace, not become a pawn in alien tradition. Yet the eyes of the council were upon him, expectant. "A bond?" he asked carefully. "Indeed," the emperor said, "a political bond, one that may unite your world and mine. One that may prevent war." The murmur in the hall grew louder. The courtiers whispered, the guards stiffened, and Elias realized the gravity of what was unfolding. He had walked into the lion's den, and now the lion was offering him a place among its pride. Princess Selara's eyes narrowed. "Do you accept this challenge, human? Do you understand what it entails?" Elias thought of Earth, of children who would never see the stars if war broke out, of leaders who had failed to protect their people. He swallowed. "I accept. If it prevents bloodshed, I accept." The emperor's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Very well, the court will decide. But understand this, your path will not be easy. The traditions of the Viorlian Empire are strict. You will be tested, humiliated, judged. Many outsiders have entered our courts. None have survived intact." Elias nodded. "I do not expect survival to be easy, only that it is possible." Princess Selara studied him quietly, her sharp gaze piercing. In that moment, Elias felt something he could not name, a measure of respect, and perhaps a seed of curiosity. The council session ended with formalities, yet the tension lingered. Guards escorted Elias to the quarters that would be his home for the foreseeable future. The walls were tall, sleek, and glowing faintly. The air smelled different here, sterile yet alive. Elias sat on a low bench, running a hand through his hair. He thought of Earth, of the families waiting, of the leaders who had placed their hopes on his shoulders. Could a single human truly survive among beings who had hunted other species into extinction? Could he change minds that had been hardened for centuries? A soft knock on the door startled him. He rose. The door slid open to reveal Princess Selara herself, unaccompanied. She regarded him silently. "You are braver than most," she said quietly, "and yet I do not know if you are foolish or if your courage is real." Elias bowed slightly. "Perhaps only time will tell, Princess." For the first time, Selara smiled, faint but real. "We shall see, human, we shall see." The door closed, leaving Elias alone. He sat back down, the weight of what was to come pressing upon him. He was here to negotiate peace, yet he now realized peace might demand more than words. It might demand his life, or something he had never imagined: loyalty, trust, and a bond stronger than any treaty. Outside, the stars glimmered, indifferent to human or Viorlian struggles. But within the halls of the Viorlian Empire, one human had taken the first step into a story that would change not only his life, but the fate of entire worlds. And in the silent moments before sleep, Elia's heart allowed himself a thought he would never speak aloud. "If courage is the only weapon I have, I will wield it until the stars themselves bow to it." Little did he know, the real trials were only beginning, trials that would test his mind, his heart, and the very essence of what it meant to be human. The morning after his first day in the royal council, Elias awoke to a silence that felt heavier than any battlefield he had ever known. His quarters were unfamiliar, the walls glowing faintly with soft light and every surface polished to an impossible shine. He had expected discomfort, even danger, but not this emptiness. A soft knock echoed through the room. Elias straightened. "Enter," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The door slid open to reveal a servant, slender and scaled like all Viorlians, carrying a tray of unfamiliar foods. The scents were alien, tangy, metallic, yet oddly inviting. The servant did not speak, only bowed and left the tray before retreating silently. Elias sat at the edge of the bed, observing the alien breakfast. He had survived war, famine, and near-death missions. He could handle strange foods. Yet he couldn't ignore the unspoken truth. He was alone in a world that saw him as a pawn. Later, a message arrived via the palace communicator. Princess Selara herself had summoned him. His heart skipped, but he masked it with calm. The corridor leading to her chambers was long and wide, with polished floors that reflected every step. Guards flanked him silently, their eyes unblinking, every muscle tense. Elias realized these hallways were as much a test as the council chambers, every detail observed, every movement judged. When the doors opened, Selara stood waiting, tall and imposing. She did not bow, but her eyes met his with a weight that could unnerve anyone. "Elia's heart," she said. "You accepted the bond yesterday without hesitation. Tell me, do you understand what it truly means?" Elias nodded. "I understand it is not a choice for comfort. It is a choice for survival and peace." Selara stepped closer, her movements precise, deliberate. "You will live among us now. You will follow our customs. You will obey our laws, and you will learn the price of failing." Elias met her gaze. "I will learn." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Good. Then your first lesson begins immediately." The lesson was more than he expected. He was led into the Chamber of Customs, a vast hall where Virelian nobles and warriors gathered. Today, he was to participate in a ritual of respect, a test of loyalty and adaptability. Every alien in the hall stared, their golden eyes unblinking. Some whispered, others simply waited. The ritual began with intricate movements, gestures of bowing, hand placement, and verbal affirmations Elias had never heard before. A single misstep could be seen as insult or rebellion. He faltered once, then twice. Whispers spread like fire. Selara observed silently from a platform above. Elias closed his eyes. He thought of Earth, of the people depending on him, of the fleet at the edge of the galaxy, of families who might never see the stars again. He focused. Slowly, he replicated the movements, not perfectly, but with intent. Every motion carried respect, even if his form was slightly human. The crowd murmured. The whispers shifted from mockery to cautious acknowledgement. Selara's eyes softened slightly. "You have potential," she said after the ritual ended. "But potential alone is not enough. Strength comes from knowledge and from knowing when to act without fear." Elias nodded, exhausted but determined. "Then teach me." Days passed in a blur. Elias studied Virelian language, history, combat customs, and diplomacy. Every lesson was a test. Some were physical. He sparred with warriors who could crush him with a single blow. Some were mental. He debated nobles on laws he barely understood. And some were social. He navigated parties, banquets, and gatherings where a single misstep could ruin Earth's chance for peace. Yet he endured. Not by matching the Virelians in strength, he never could, but by using what humans had mastered: adaptability, empathy, and observation. Princess Selara noticed. Often she would appear silently, watching him struggle, then succeed. Once, after a particularly grueling day of etiquette tests, she approached him. "You adapt quickly," she said, "faster than most humans I have encountered." "Why?" Elias smiled faintly. "Because survival is worth more than pride." Her golden eyes lingered on him, curious and unreadable. "You are not like others, yet I wonder if your bravery is born of courage or ignorance." "Perhaps both," he replied. She inclined her head slightly. "We shall see." Then came the first real danger. A faction of nobles, bitter and resentful, began plotting against him. They saw the human as a threat to tradition, a disruption to the hierarchy. They whispered in shadows, sending threats, challenging his every action. One evening at a royal banquet, the plot turned violent. A hidden dagger was aimed at Selara's back. Elias, noticing a flicker of motion, reacted instantly. In a single, fluid movement, he intercepted the attack, taking a shallow cut across his arm. The dagger clattered to the floor. Gasps echoed through the hall. The nobles froze. Selara's expression shifted: surprise, awe, something softer. Elias, holding his arm, did not retreat. Instead, he turned to the would-be assassin. "Violence solves nothing," he said calmly, "but justice and restraint can win more than swords ever will." The hall was silent. The nobles' whispers died. Even the guards hesitated, uncertain if the human had just survived foolishly or demonstrated strength no one had expected. Selara approached him, placing a scaled hand lightly on his shoulder. "You risked your life for me, for all of us." "That is unusual for a human." Elias shook his head. "Not unusual for those who wish peace." Her eyes softened. "You are changing things, whether tradition likes it or not." Weeks turned into months. Elias continued to adapt, earning respect in small but meaningful ways. He did not flaunt strength or dominance. Instead, he demonstrated human ingenuity, clever strategies in games of war simulation, negotiation skills during disputes, and an unexpected ability to inspire loyalty among guards and servants. The court began to see him not as weak or emotional, but as resilient. Selara began to trust him, though she would not admit it openly. And Elias, despite the constant danger, began to understand her. The weight of tradition she carried, the loneliness of her position, and the quiet longing for someone who could meet her not with fear, but with respect. Yet danger was never far away. The rebel nobles still plotted, waiting for a moment to strike, to reclaim power, and to discredit the human who dared change centuries of Viorlian customs. One night, as Elias prepared for rest, Selara appeared again. She did not speak immediately, only watched. Then in a quiet voice she said, "Elias Hart, you are not like anyone I have known. You survive where others would fail. You adapt where others would break. And yet I wonder if you know what you have truly become." Elias tilted his head. "A pawn, a symbol. A human who refuses to bow," she smiled faintly. "Perhaps all of those things and more. Perhaps a bridge between two worlds." Elias felt the weight of her words. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had come to negotiate peace, yet he had already become part of a story far larger than himself, a story that could determine the fate of entire worlds. As he lay awake that night, he thought of Earth, of the fleet waiting for news, and of the countless lives depending on his success. The Viorlian Empire was vast, ancient, and unyielding. Yet for the first time, Elias felt something new: hope. Hope born not from weapons, not from power, but from the human spirit, the courage to endure, adapt, and rise where others would fall. And in that quiet, alien palace, among strangers who doubted him, and enemies who wished him harm, Elias Hart realized something extraordinary. He was no longer just a diplomat. He was a human, and that was enough to change the galaxy. The trials were only beginning. The bonds he would form, the enemies he would face, and the choices he would make would shape the future. But one thing was certain: the human who walked into the lion's den would not leave unchanged. And for the first time, Princess Selara allowed herself to think that perhaps this human might just survive. Weeks passed in the Viorlian palace, and Elias Hart's presence had become both a fascination and a threat. Whispers followed him through corridors, some filled with admiration, others with contempt. To many Viorlians, he was an anomaly, a human who refused to bow fully yet gained respect without bending traditions completely. But peace is never easy. Behind the gilded walls of the palace, a group of powerful nobles, loyal to old customs and fearful of change, plotted in secret. They believed that the human's influence over Princess Selara threatened the stability of the empire. Their plan was simple: create chaos, discredit Elias, and force Selara to reject him, restoring order. Elias sensed the tension long before it came to light. His instincts, honed through years of military training and diplomacy, told him something was brewing. But even he could not imagine the scale of the danger that awaited. One morning, the palace erupted in chaos. The royal guards, alarms blared as armored figures stormed the courtyard. Rebel nobles had launched a coup, aiming to seize control of the city and overthrow the emperor. The palace gates were blocked and the Virelian warriors were caught off guard. Elias stood beside Selara as the first wave of attackers advanced. Her golden eyes were sharp, calculating. "This is not just a threat to me," she said, her voice low but steady. "It is a threat to everything we have built. Can your species help us?" Elias squared his shoulders. "Humans survive by thinking, adapting, and working together. I will not let your empire fall without a fight, not if I can prevent it." Selara allowed him to lead. In the corridors and halls, he coordinated the palace defenders. Using human tactics, he predicted the rebels' movements, identified weak points, and guided the Virelian warriors to defend strategic locations. His strategies were unconventional. He used misdirection, traps, and clever timing, all of which were unfamiliar to the Virelians but highly effective. The rebels were strong and ruthless, but Elias' calm presence inspired the defenders. Guards who once doubted him began following his instructions with confidence. His human ingenuity turned chaos into order. During the battle, Elias faced his first direct challenge. A Virelian noble, a towering warrior with scales darker than most, lunged at him with a double-edged blade. Elias dodged and rolled, barely avoiding the deadly strike. Using a combination of agility and quick thinking, he maneuvered the noble into a narrow hallway, where the warrior's size became a disadvantage. Elias disarmed him with a precise move learned from military training, and the man fell to the floor, shocked and defeated. Selara witnessed the act from above. She realized something important. This human was not just brave. He was calculated, adaptable, and fearless. Qualities the Virelians prized but rarely expected from outsiders. Hours turned into a long, exhausting night. Fires burned in some wings of the palace, alarms echoed, and yet Elias and Selara pressed on. In the command center, he coordinated the defense, communicated with loyal forces outside the palace, and ensured the safety of civilians trapped in the halls. Every decision mattered. A single mistake could mean the fall of the palace and the collapse of the Virelian Empire. Through it all, Elias remained calm. His human mind worked in patterns alien to the Virelians. Where they relied on brute force, he relied on strategy and foresight. Where they sought to intimidate, he sought to outthink. Slowly, the tide began to turn. By dawn, the rebels were cornered. Many surrendered while the remaining forces fled. The palace had survived thanks to a human who refused to break under pressure. After the battle, the palace was quiet, almost eerily so. Selara approached Elias, her expression unreadable. "You have done something no human has ever done in Virelian history," she said softly. "You led warriors, saved lives, and preserved the empire, and you did it without violence unless absolutely necessary." Elias shook his head. "I did what anyone would do to protect those who cannot defend themselves. That is all." Selara smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed admiration. "You are extraordinary, Elias Hart. You do not fight like a human or a Virelian. You fight like something else." He allowed himself a brief moment of pride, though he kept his focus. There was no time to celebrate. The rebel nobles were weakened, but they had powerful allies outside the palace. The human could sense the danger was far from over. The days following the battle were tense, but filled with a new kind of understanding. The Virelian court began to recognize Elias' value. His calm reasoning, his clever strategies, and his refusal to be intimidated earned him cautious respect. Even Princess Selara's feelings toward him began to change. No longer was he just a diplomat or a pawn. He was her partner in navigating a dangerous, complex empire. One evening, Selara invited him to walk through the palace gardens. The Virelian night sky sparkled above them, filled with unfamiliar constellations. The gardens were filled with exotic plants that glowed faintly in the dark, and alien birds sang songs Elias could not understand. "You were brave during the battle," Selara said quietly, breaking the silence. "But bravery alone does not explain why you survived." Elias looked up at her. "Survival requires more than strength. It requires observation, understanding, and adaptability. I watch, I learn, and I act when the moment demands. Humans have always done this to survive in wars, in disasters, in the harshest conditions. We endure because we must, not because we are the strongest." Selara studied him, golden eyes reflecting starlight. "Perhaps that is what makes your species remarkable, weak yet strong, fragile yet unyielding." Elias smiled faintly. "I suppose every species has strengths. But humans, we survive against the odds." For the first time, Selara allowed herself to relax beside him. The princess who had lived in rigid tradition, always careful, always measured, now saw a human who could match her in courage, intelligence, and will. A partnership not by law but by choice began to form. Yet the empire's troubles were not over. The rebel nobles had fled but left behind chaos, sowing seeds of discontent among other planets under Virealian rule. Messages arrived daily, uprisings, threats, and unrest. The palace required constant attention. Elias, though exhausted, remained at Selara's side. He organized relief efforts, mediated disputes, and continued to guide the court in ways unfamiliar but effective. Slowly, the galaxy began to notice the humans' influence. Planets that had once resisted Virealian rule began cooperating. Allies grew stronger. Peace, fragile and tentative, began to take root. Through it all, Selara observed quietly. She no longer saw him as a mere human or a political tool. She saw him as a partner, someone whose courage and mind could match her own, someone who refused to bend or break even when the odds were impossible. One night, as they looked out over the city from the palace balcony, Selara spoke softly. "Elia's heart, you have changed more than you realize. You have shown our people that strength is not just power or tradition. It is wisdom, restraint, and courage. And perhaps that is what my empire needs." Elias felt the weight of her words. He had come to negotiate peace for humanity, yet in the process he had become something more, a symbol of hope, resilience, and unity. He turned to her. "I only did what I had to do for your people, for Earth, and for peace. That is all a human can do." Selara's eyes softened, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine a future where humans and Virealians could truly coexist. A future where courage, respect, and understanding bridged two worlds. The days that followed were quieter but filled with purpose. Elias continued to navigate the delicate balance between human ingenuity and Virealian tradition. He trained warriors in unconventional strategies, advised Selara on governance, and slowly he began to feel a place for himself within this alien empire. Yet one thought never left him. The galaxy was still dangerous, and the challenges ahead would test every skill, every ounce of courage, and every choice he had made. But for the first time, Elia's heart understood something fundamental. Being human was not a weakness. It was a strength. In a world of rigid laws, ancient traditions, and near-invincible warriors, the human spirit, adaptable, clever, unyielding, could survive, influence, and even change the course of history. And in the quiet moments before dawn, as he looked over the city with Princess Selara beside him, Elias allowed himself a rare thought. Maybe, just maybe, humans could not only survive among the stars, they could thrive. The trials were far from over. The threats would grow. The choices would become even harder. But the human who refused to break had already proven one undeniable truth. Courage, wisdom, and heart could change the destiny of worlds. And in that realization, both human and Virealian began to glimpse a future that had once seemed impossible, a future forged not by force, but by unity, respect, and the unshakable spirit of humanity. The Virealian palace had survived the coup, but the echoes of rebellion still lingered in its vast halls. Guards patrolled with sharper eyes, nobles whispered in corners, and the people watched carefully, waiting to see how the strange human who had survived and even thrived would shape the empire. Elia's heart moved through the palace with quiet confidence. Months of navigating Virelian customs, surviving tests, and earning respect had transformed him from a diplomat into a figure of influence. Yet he remained humble, aware that every decision now carried consequences far beyond himself. Princess Celara stood beside him as they observed the city below. Towers of silver gleamed under twin suns, while streets teemed with Virelians going about their lives, unaware of how close their world had come to chaos. Elias, Celara said softly, you have done more than survive. You have changed the way our people see themselves and the way they see your kind. Elias looked out at the city, then back at her. I only did what any human would do, protect what matters, adapt, and never give up. That is all I know. Celara's golden eyes softened. Perhaps, but that is more than enough. The first act of true diplomacy came soon after. The rebel nobles, though defeated, had allies on neighboring planets. These allies demanded justice for what they called the human interference in Virelian affairs. The emperor summoned Elias and Celara to the council, expecting tension, perhaps even rebellion. Elias stepped forward, calm and composed. He addressed the council in clear, measured words. Violence breeds more violence, he said. Our strength does not lie in punishing those who oppose us, but in showing that fairness, strategy, and understanding can unite worlds. Humans survive because we do not rely solely on force. We adapt, negotiate, and inspire loyalty through action, not fear. This is how peace can last. The council murmured. Some were skeptical, others intrigued. Elias continued, laying out a plan that balanced justice with diplomacy. Rebel leaders would face trial, lands would be restored fairly, and neighboring planets would see that the Virelian Empire could embrace wisdom as well as strength. Celara watched him closely. His words resonated with her people, and even the emperor seemed to reconsider old assumptions. The council, for the first time in generations, saw a path forward that did not rely solely on dominance. Weeks turned into months as the reforms Elias proposed took shape. Rebels were held accountable but not destroyed. Planets once suspicious of Virelian rule began to cooperate willingly. Trade routes reopened, alliances were formed, and the empire's reputation grew not only for power but also for fairness and wisdom. Elias and Celara's bond, too, had strengthened. It was no longer just a political necessity. It had become a partnership built on mutual respect, shared trials, and trust. Together, they demonstrated that cooperation between humans and Virelians was not only possible but beneficial. One evening, as the palace balcony glowed under the twin moons, Celara spoke quietly. Elias, the council, and the people now look to you not as a guest but as a leader. Your presence has changed more than I imagined. You have shown that humans are not weak, that courage and intelligence can reshape empires. Elias shook his head, humbled. I only did what had to be done. If my actions inspire others, then that is enough. Celara smiled faintly. No, it is more than enough. It is history. The final test came unexpectedly. A neighboring alien empire, observing the Virelians' internal upheaval, considered an attack to exploit perceived weakness. Entire fleets moved silently toward Virelian space, ready to strike. The Virelian court turned to Elias for advice. Warriors and generals were hesitant, expecting retaliation through sheer force. Elias, however, proposed a different strategy. We do not fight alone, he explained. We send emissaries to their leaders. We show our strength, yes, but also our wisdom. If we act with strategy and diplomacy, we may prevent bloodshed and unite against future threats. Celara nodded. Do you trust your human methods? I do, he said simply. They have worked before. Elias personally led the delegation, speaking directly to the rival empire's council. His clarity, calm, and honesty astonished the alien leaders. Humans were small, yes, but resilient. They adapted, understood, and negotiated with precision. Elia's reputation as a man who could change the course of conflicts spread quickly. Within hours, the rival fleets withdrew. An agreement was signed, a treaty that respected both sides and strengthened Virelian influence without war. The Virelian people hailed Elias as a hero. He had survived impossible challenges, reformed traditions, and preserved peace. Yet he remained humble, always redirecting praise to the people around him and the cooperation of Princess Selara. The final step of the bond came when Selara made her decision public. In the Grand Council Hall, before nobles, warriors, and emissaries from across the galaxy, she approached Elias. "You have proven yourself," she declared, her voice carrying through the vast hall. "Not just as a diplomat, not just as a human, but as a partner in shaping the future of the Virelian Empire. Elia's heart, will you stand by my side not by law but by choice?" Elias felt the weight of the moment. For months, he had faced danger, tests, and political intrigue. And now, the woman he respected and had come to trust offered him a partnership unlike any other. "I will," he said simply. "Not for power, not for glory, but to protect peace, to honor trust, and to ensure our worlds survive together." A roar of approval echoed through the hall. The bond was no longer a political necessity. It was a choice, a union that symbolized unity, trust, and the potential for cooperation across the stars. Years passed. The human and the princess became symbols of a new era. Earth and the Virelian Empire developed lasting alliances. Other species began to reconsider humanity, once seen as weak, now seen as capable, clever, and courageous. Trade, knowledge, and exploration flourished. Elias never sought titles or power. He remained a human among aliens, always a diplomat, a strategist, and a protector. His presence reminded everyone that survival and influence came not from dominance alone, but from resilience, adaptability, and moral courage. Selara often stood beside him, not as a ruler commanding a subject, but as a partner facing the galaxy together. Their bond inspired countless others to look beyond species, tradition, and fear, toward cooperation and understanding. One night, as the twin moons rose over the palace, Elias stood on the balcony, gazing at the stars. Selara joined him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "We have changed more than empires," she said softly. "We have changed minds, hearts, and hope itself." Elias smiled. "It was never just me. Humans survive because we adapt, learn, and endure. And perhaps the galaxy needed a human to remind everyone of that." Selara nodded. "And you have done it without losing yourself. That is remarkable." Elias looked out into the endless sky. Maybe humanity's true strength is not in weapons, fleets, or technology. Maybe it is in being human, in courage, hope, and the refusal to break, no matter the odds. The princess squeezed his hand gently. "Then let us continue together, as partners, as allies, as something new." And in that moment, under alien skies and the watchful eyes of a galaxy that had once doubted humanity, a human diplomat became more than a negotiator. He became a symbol, a bridge, and a bond that would change the course of history. Elia's heart had walked into the lion's den, faced impossible odds, and survived. But more than survival, he had achieved something far greater. He had changed the hearts of an empire and reminded the galaxy why humanity could never be underestimated. The stars stretched endlessly, but for the first time they seemed filled with promise, not fear. And in that promise, the human and the alien princess stood together, ready to face the future, united, unbroken, and unyielding.